Hi there everyone, I'm Kyle and this is webinar 3 of our Meeting of Minds series with Artisan. I'm from the Applied Influence Group, and what we're going to do is take you through influence lessons that we had from Tea with the Taliban. As I said, this is webinar 3. What we're going to do is take you through some of the influence techniques we used on military operations throughout the world. For newcomers, I'm one of 5 co-founders of Applied Influence Group and a team of elite influence practitioners that gained and developed our expertise on high pressure and relentless specialist military intelligence operations. So we were tasked with influencing the decisions, behaviours, thoughts of the most tenacious and fixed mindsets, individuals like Taliban commanders, bomb makers, politicians, lawyers, military leaders, etc., all very, very rigid in their mindsets. What we do now as a business, AIG, is take that expertise and experience to businesses in order to build elite influence capability, helping those businesses to be more successful and improve their performance and, importantly, profitability. So we appreciate some of you might have been here before, and we've done the units 1 and 2 in the previous webinars, so we'll only be brief in introducing ourselves this time. So just into the company, obviously we've got Emma Dutton, MBE, who is the Managing Director of Applied Influence Group. So her role in our capability within Afghanistan was fairly senior. So the capability being what it was very niche and very politically charged and had a huge microscope over it. And our actions went directly up to the cabinet, and coupled with levels of risks we were dealing with meant that she found herself on a daily basis having to influence very senior, experienced, intelligent, and often very difficult individuals. And she had to influence them into seeing things from her perspective and to build trust. So she ended up using the same skills and tools that she previously used to influence bomb makers, smugglers and terrorists as she did when influencing the politicians, lawyers and civil servants. So that was a significant moment of realization for AIG because it led to the founding of this company. But it also demonstrated that it might not have been a Taliban commander on the other end of the interaction, but it was still a human being. And the skill set that we developed was just as relevant. Myself, I'm Carl Hughes, and I spent 6 years in the military, 6 years being an analyst within the intelligence corps in the army, and then the final 6 years of my 12-year service spent within this capability of influence, both as an operator, manager, and finished being the senior instructor for this capability within defence. So nowadays I work mainly in training for Applied Influence Group, designing and delivering services that we provide. So why influence? Again, don't want to labour it. If you've been here before, you can go back and check our previous webinars. But we influence because it's the core of our performance and success. We think influence is the ability to change or alter an individual's or organisation's thinking, feeling, culture or behaviours. Elite influence practitioners do that with skill and precision. We plan, engage and adapt to all interaction with skills and tools that have been stress tested beyond business, creating long-term and sustainable, mutually beneficial relationships. And the value of that is improved performance and profitability. So that's a little bit of the why, and what we're going to do today is give you a sample of the how with the methodology in the third of our 9 units. Again, we're going to use 2 case studies, which we'll introduce and remind you of if you've been here before, to handrail our experience and just to show you as Artisan customers that you can use exactly the same skill set to maximise opportunities that we did in Afghanistan in your business, following using the Artisan product. Okay, so we've got the value model here. Our service results in 9 business outcomes that you can see on screen, and they're distilled into 3 areas: impact, relationships and performances that will come about of being an elite influence practitioner. So this webinar series will give you an introductory sample to our methodology only, not our services. Our services include class exercises, discussion, demonstrations, Practical exercises where we throw you out into the real world and interact with role players in order to map across what we do, our methodology with what you do. Okay, we also include a lot of coaching as well. That's coaching and consultancy. That's how we transmit our value. So before we go into the operational case study, just again need to give you a little bit of context. We obviously have to exercise caution over facts with our contracts and agreements with the MOD. So details have been changed. However, the way in which we influence is all from real experiences. Okay, it's important that you understand that. So I've mentioned it a couple of times. If you're new to our webinar series, you'll have missed out on our fabulous previous units. Unit 1 focused on profiling and planning, where we took you through a step-by-step guide on what we did when preparing to interact with any member of the Taliban or influence any personalities on our side of the fence. At the root of profiling and planning unit was the DNA of influence, as shown on screen on the left-hand side of the screen. The model provides a framework for capturing information on the subject. We look into personality type, attitudes and beliefs, interests, likes and dislikes, relationships and networks, and drives and motivations. The information found on an individual in this tool is then utilised into our short-term influence plan, which is conscious planning, is of an interaction, is the singular most important thing that can improve an individual's natural ability to influence another. Okay, you can have poor communication skills, low emotional intelligence, but if you plan using our DNA of influence and short-term influence plan, your interactions can be extremely effective and mutually beneficial. Okay, webinar 2 looked at the effectiveness of using rapport and empathy with an individual in the pursuit of influencing them. We introduce you to the rapport escalator. The rapport escalator can be used in a number of ways. In its most basic form, it can be used as a monitoring tool to assist in maintaining rapport. By consciously monitoring where on the escalator a conversation is and how the subject is responding, we can avoid pushing too hard into areas which might damage that rapport. At the first sign of the individual becoming uncomfortable, we can move back down a level to less risky areas. We can also use the escalator as a planning tool, particularly if we know that the real area we wish to discuss is in a high-risk zone on the escalator. For example, if we need to discuss how an employee is feeling about a task, we may wish to consider progressively building the conversation towards this using related topics on the escalator to get where we really want to be. Also, our methodology has been utilised by countless delegates attending our services, and they've employed the methods and tools that brought us success on military operations, and that's having an effect on their business. So that's Unit 1 and 2, and this webinar is going to be going into Unit 3, okay, which is Elicitation and Listening. So if you've watched our previous webinar or attended any of our courses, you'll be aware that we like to handrail our teaching with an operational example of how we utilised our methodology with the Taliban. Okay, for newcomers, here's a quick recap. UK forces operated in south of Afghanistan in Helmand province and consistently faced a number of Taliban attack networks that were planting IEDs or bombs in the ground to combat ISAF presence and control population. Civilian deaths grew year on year, reached a peak in 2011 when 3,000 civilians were killed and almost 600 coalition troops died on operations. IEDs were destroying communities in Afghanistan. It was killing many civilians and soldiers. It was our mission to neutralise the threat from the Taliban, and as specialist intelligence operators, we needed to gain targetable information on Taliban networks responsible for carrying out these attacks and the multitude of other attacks across southern Afghanistan. The Taliban fighting cells relied on smuggling networks to supply them with weapons, explosives, components, etc. One way for us to neutralise their offensive capability was to target these smuggling networks. So in the summer of 2011, we were presented with the opportunity to speak with Taliban IED cell affiliate Ahmed Rahman. He was researched and profiled, and with the findings we populated the DNA of influence in Unit 1. A full short-term influence plan was then completed, and for full details, please see the previous webinar. However, I don't have enough time to go into that, but due to the assessments made, the tasks for that initial meeting were to start laying the path for him to trust us and identify elements of his personality that could be used to present an agreeable frame. This third webinar is all about the listening and elicitation techniques we use to start putting this plan into action, and this complemented the rapport escalator detailed in Unit 2 and the previous webinar. It's also important for us to set the scene how you might use these very same tools and techniques in your world to overcome some of the challenges you face. So let's quickly remind you of the business case study we used to accompany this webinar series. Lucy is a B2B account manager for a financial service corporate. She manages 12 accounts for banks, insurance company and investment firms. And additionally, her job is to develop new business to add to her client list. However, it's an area that she's been struggling with. She struggles to develop new relationships, and she struggles to win personal buy-in without the power of the brand behind her. An improvement in these areas would drastically improve her sales performance and increase the length of her client relationships. It also give her a reduced qualifying time of each lead. So Lucy uses Artisan search engine to identify information about sales triggers, just like you do. So she finds out growth stories, management changes, investment news, quality results in order to find potential new clients. One morning she gets information that a bank, which is a non-existing client, is opening 4 new branches and sees that the guy running that project is called Tom Clark. He's responsible for him. Like we did with Ahmed, Lucy put together a DNA of influence on Tom and created a short-term influence plan to lay foundations to ultimately influence him into becoming one of her clients. Based on her assessments, her aim for her initial interaction was to introduce Tom to the company's service and win personal buy-in and credibility. And secondly, identify elements of Tom's personality that could be utilised to assist in developing long-term mutually beneficial relationship. Okay, this was going to be done with the pretext of a handwritten letter to set up a phone call, and then we're referring to the business case study throughout this webinar. We'll examine the skills Lucy used to achieve her initial aim. We mentioned it quite a lot in the previous one with the rapport escalator, and as I said, these listening skills and questioning skills complemented and supplemented that rapport escalator. So it brought out a hell of a lot more information than previously would have come from Tom when they're interacting. Okay, our methodology is primarily from our operational experiences. It's been bolstered by research when we came back from ops, both academically and collaboration with other government agencies. Certainly not psychologists, academics or master NLP practitioners. But we've taken bits from all of that where we're most relevant to our skill set and which have definitely worked in practice. So we've codified it into 3 modules: understand, communicate and influence. And within each of these modules are separate units full of teaching tools, protocols and techniques. You can see it on the screen. We are only going to be in the understand module, and because the understand module is broken down into 3 areas. Okay, unit 3, webinar 3 is elicitation and listening, completing that understand module for you. So being able to effectively gather information and use active listening will help the influence practitioner gather the information to implement an effective influence strategy. These skills are very closely linked with other areas of influence, such as rapport building and communication skills. This part of the methodology will firstly look at elicitation, beginning with the basic questioning techniques, and then looking at more subtle methods of gathering information. The second part of the unit will look at different types of listening with a particular focus on active listening. Okay. Elicitation involves more than merely asking questions. The US Department of Defense specifically notes that elicitation involves acquiring information from a person or group in a manner that does not disclose the intent of the interview or conversation. When we're seeking to influence someone, we will often want to draw information out of the subject without them understanding why we want it. And as you can imagine, with dealing with Afghans and Taliban, that was really, really important and significant. This requires in-depth training in covert elicitation, and we clearly don't have the time in this webinar to go into some of the techniques that we would have employed when attempting this, such as masking, flattery or provocation. Besides, before attempting covert elicitation, you've got to master overt or open elicitation first. Knowing the right questions and how to ask them to get the specific information you require is essential, as it could lead to wasted time and incorrect information, neither of which we could afford on operations. Understanding different types of questions and how and when to use them is the first building block for effective elicitation. The main types of questions are as follows: open, closed, leading, multiple, double negative or rhetorical. So an open question, an example of that is for what did you do today, how did you get there, where are you going? The who, what, where, when, why, how, what else. Okay, so use of why can elicit reasons, but can also be viewed as judgmental. So why did you do it that way? Potentially just a little bit of consideration before using that word. But it's those open questions are used for gathering a body of information, and it also shows interest. It can, if done incorrectly, it's seen a little bit too much like an interrogation, though. So if you want to have your person that you're interacting with at ease and calm, then potentially who, what, where, when, why, how, and the style in which you deliver it, okay, should be considered, because it could seem a little bit awkward. Okay, second question, the second type of question, closed question. So that usually requires a single word answer. Okay. Did you see Rob today? Is it raining? Okay, these are used to gather specific information, and but can also be used to direct a conversation. Leading questions. So it's a good deal then, wasn't it? Okay, what you're doing there is directing the conversation and can be used to get someone else to draw the conclusions that you want them to. Okay, but it's not really useful for gathering information. It can be viewed as condescending or as crass. It's useful in the right circumstances, but certainly leading questions, caution's got to be required. Multiple questions. So if you're speaking to somebody and they ask you what they think is one question, was it a good event? Who was there? What was the food like? Okay, which question do you want me to ask? Okay, it's poor for information gathering, as it may be unclear what question that person wants asking, but it's often asked when the questioner has not really formed questioning strategy properly prior to beginning speaking. However, it can also be used to add to cognitive overload, which again is something that we cover in emotional intelligence. Double negative questions. These are rarely used. They're unclear as to what it is being asked, and they often include words such as not within the question. So double negative example would be, should you not use the best software available? Again, it's very leading, not very good for gathering information. And finally, the last band of questions is rhetorical. So these, again, can be used to direct conversation. They can be viewed negatively by the other party, but alternatively can be used in a self-deprecating manner. You didn't possibly think I'd say yes to that, did you? Okay, so yeah, another example of that. Again, poor for information gathering, pretty good for rapport building. So now you've got the questions to ask, you need to put them into a strategy in order to gain key information. And there are a number of strategies to employ. However, when trying to achieve this, to ensure our information gathering was detailed, logical, and persistent, we used what's called the Elicitation Funnel, as you can see on screen now. So we'll use different types of questions along the Elicitation Funnel shown on the slide. The funnel is designed to give a framework to gather information in relatively simple environments. More advanced elicitation, such as masking the information that you're interested in, is discussed in a lot more depth in our other services. We work our way down the funnel, first gaining a narrative from subject. To do this, we'll use an instruction rather than a question. Commands use the word tell, explain, or describe to get the person to give a narrative response. It'll draw out a lot more information from that person. Unless the topic is sensitive, the natural inclination of the other person will be to respond with a narrative reply. Even if the topic is sensitive, it's difficult for the other person to give no response. So depending on the natural conversation style of the other person, the narrative could be quite extended. If time is precious and it's known that this type of conversational style is used, then it's possible to move to the next level of the funnel, although some information will be lost. So, next level down, active listening. Active listening is going to be looked at later in this unit, in this webinar, but by using the active listening techniques during the narrative phase of this question, the other person can be encouraged to continue providing further information with limited interruptions by yourself. And we'll go through techniques in which to engage that person with, which we do with Ahmed and Lisa did with Tom in the second half of this webinar. Next phase, being reactive to the information provided by the other person not only allows you to gather further information, but also shows the other person that you're interested in what they're saying. By following up on specific points, by following up on specific points using open questions, such as who, what, where, when, and how, we'll gather further information on this specific area, funneling the questions down into the area we are interested in. It's important that these questions are genuinely reactive to what the other person has said in the narrative. The temptation when planning a meeting is to prepare a list of questions, but if the prepared questions isn't entirely reactive, it can make the interaction become disjointed. If done really badly, it can lead the other person to realise that you're not actually interested in what they're saying and may cause them to close down, something that we certainly don't want. And then finally, to confirm specific points, we can use closed questions to get single-word answers to confirm those answers, yes or no. At times, the funnel process will be completed in a matter of minutes with a short narrative followed by 1 or 2 open questions. There may be a closed question to confirm one specific point. Alternatively, the narrative could go on for half an hour with a two-way reactive conversation going on for an hour afterwards. Individual confirmatory questions might be asked throughout for points of clarity. There's no right way to use a funnel, although the ideal is to follow it from top to bottom on each area that you are interested in, as this makes the questioning more logical, but at times this can feel over-procedural to the other person. So again, this is just something that Lucy had to consider when speaking to Tom. At times, the conversation may move naturally between areas. If this takes place, we need to keep a mental note to return to areas that we're interested in. When we return to an area, we continue on the funnel at the same point that we moved off that topic. So that's the elicitation funnel that both us and Artisan customers have used when trying to understand the needs of the customer. Okay, if you stick to this process, you're going to get a lot more information than previous. Okay, so let's move on to the listening. So at first glance, listening might seem like a simple activity, okay, that warrants little further examination. According to some sources, however, there are 27 different types of listening, each with their own different characteristics. These can range from casual listening, where we listen without without obviously showing attention, to discriminative listening, where we are waiting to hear something but nothing else. The main purpose of listening for influence are to assist in developing a positive relationship with the individual and to ensure that we gather maximum information to understand that person and help the influence interaction. Active listening is the best form of listening to achieve this. It is both internal and external, meaning that whilst we are giving all the external signs of listening, you are paying 100% attention to what is being said. It also relies on a degree of empathy too, so you can be sensitive and reactive to what is being told. If you are not all of these things, then when the stakes are high and you are trying to build trust with an individual, you could risk burning rapport and undermine the efforts to influence an individual. So, the listening wheel, as shown on screen, is based on crisis negotiation techniques developed by the FBI and used operationally in many high-risk environments, both police and military. The techniques were designed to respond to the emotional needs of a subject, which is largely what we're seeking to achieve in the influence sphere. Utilising the sectors of the wheel will assist you in deploying active listening and achieving 80 to 20 balance. What we mean by this is if you are talking for 20% of the time and the person you're questioning 80% of the time, you stand a much better chance of putting the person at ease, understanding them more and developing a lot more trust. Thinking back to our business outcomes, that's something that we definitely want to achieve. Starting at the top and working around the wheel, we'll identify the sections and explain each of the techniques listed. So, at the top centre, you've got minimal encourages. These are the small verbal and non-verbal methods of encouragement that we regularly use to signal to the other person that we're paying attention or that we want them to continue. A nod of the head, a little yeah, go on. We'll already have developed our own natural method of doing this. Record a video of yourself talking to someone and then play it back, and you'll quickly identify the natural minimal encouragers that you use. Now consciously start to use them more often, and you'll quickly see how people begin to provide you more information or continue talking than they previously did. Open questions. We've already looked at the benefits of open questions. In the context of active listening, open questions encourage the other person to talk, providing greater opportunities for listening and subsequently understanding. Over-reliance on closed questions or our own narrative will quickly shift the talking/listening balance into one where we are dominating the conversation. For influence interactions, we commonly want the balance to be in the other direction, at least in the early stages of interaction. A reflective comment. These are sometimes known as verbal mirroring and involve verbalizing the final few words spoken by the subject in a slightly different way. An example might be, I'm fed up with my heavy-handed boss, with the response being, he's heavy-handed, eh? This shows the subject both that you've understood what they say and that you're paying attention. It also invites them to elaborate. Yeah, here's how Ian did. He did this, that, X, Y, and Z. Okay, so what you're doing is getting them to volunteer more information or drop out information, as we label it. Next one, emotional labeling. We'll look at the importance of emotions in much more depth later in the methodology and in our other units, but knowing and understanding them is an incredibly powerful tool. By giving an emotional label to what the other person has said, we're demonstrating that we understand how they feel. For example, if someone has been describing a road traffic accident they were involved in, we might comment that that must have been scary. This shows the other person that we know they may have been feeling fear, and again, gets them to elaborate, getting more information and more understanding of that person. So linking it back to the previous webinar, that would be cognitive empathy. Next one, paraphrasing, and this is a technique of summarizing in a shortened form the essence of what someone's just said. This is another good way of demonstrating both that you are attentive and that you've understood what they've said. This is often done by using the last few words of a sentence or an abbreviated form of the last spoken paragraph. iMessaging, if something isn't clear or if we just want to ask somebody to explain something in more depth, then iMessaging is a good way of doing this. iMessages are phrases such as, sorry, I didn't understand that, or I think I might have missed something there. Using these phrases means the subject doesn't feel that they're providing an adequate answer. We are taking the blame for that lack of understanding. Effective pauses. Communication theory has seen significant research into turn-taking within conversations. Turn-taking is the idea that one person will communicate and the other person will be expected to take their turn. For elicitation purposes, we may well want the other person to continue to take their turn whilst we listen and absorb that information. One way of the interrupting the turn-taking sequence can be through the use of effective pauses. The research on pauses isn't conclusive, but practical experimentation in the field suggests that it can be highly effective. Some individuals really don't like the uncomfortable silence left when someone doesn't take their turn and fills the gap by speaking out of turn. For pauses to be effective, they usually need to be longer than 3 seconds. This can be difficult to achieve as the natural reaction is for us to fill the gap. Effective pauses can become ineffective in the expected gap between individuals is different. Some individuals expect a minimal gap and will continue to talk even when it's your turn to speak. It's important to be conscious of this and we are attempting to deliberately use pauses to elicit further information. Last one, summarizing. Whereas paraphrasing involves giving a general sentence of what the last thing was said to show attention and understanding, summarizing can be done in much greater depth. Summarizing would usually be done at the end of a topic of conversation, ensure that your understanding of the information provided by the other person matches theirs. It can be a useful way of highlighting any inaccurate understandings, but can prompt the other person to provide additional information which you may have missed during the initial conversation. Summarizing can be combined with an iMessage in the form of, can I just make sure that I got this right? How and when we use each technique will depend a lot on who we are speaking to, how their own conversational style works, and how much we are attempting to direct the conversation. For someone who is eager to talk to us, it might require only occasional minimal encouragers to show the other person that we're still paying attention. For some individuals, particularly if they're reticent about talking about the subject, we may need to use all other elements of the active listening to get that person to continue talking, and that was definitely the case in Afghanistan. Utilising these techniques will allow the practitioner to clarify information, ensure that the person who is providing the information knows that they're being listened to, and also trigger dropout. This is when someone provides additional information that they may not have previously given as they are triggered into elaborating more. This, as you can imagine, has several benefits when attempting to get people to open up more when they are talking to you. Additionally, if you utilise an active listening correctly, again, I'll just mention that you've got to be aiming for you talking for approximately 20% of the time and then 80%. This is going to show that you're opening up and this is not only going to show you that they're opening up and becoming comfortable talking to you, but also ensure that the conversation doesn't feel like an interrogation as they're voluntarily providing information about the minimum of prompts. Okay. So, how is this methodology relevant to our interactions with Ahmed Rahman? As we previously stated, we wanted to start laying the path for him to trust us, and identify elements of our personality that could be used to present an agreeable frame. These aims were selected specifically because our assessment of him from doing a DNA of influence was that he was extremely unlikely to volunteer information about Taliban IED networks to us this early on in our interactions. He was also extremely anti-foreign forces within his country, of which we were. In the previous webinars, we spoke about how we established that Ahmed was happy to talk about authority figures in his life, what he expects them to do, how he's reacted, what poor authority looks like, etc. Well, all of that was established from getting simple information about his family background. We were on the facts and information step of the report escalator, and he identified that his father had died when he was relatively young. We asked him to tell us more about that, and he did straight away, offering insights and thoughts about it, describing how it made him feel and the reason he reacted in certain situations. Using the elicitation funnel to collect a mass amount of information on the subject and the listening wheel to make him feel comfortable to elaborate on facts we received, a wealth of information that started on the loss of his father and ended up in him talking about authority figures and systems. This was essential information to know, as it gave us an insight as to what made up Ahmed and how we could react given certain stimulus, and so we could start incorporating that into our influence strategy. If you're scratching your head wondering how this is important information, the exact specifics are covered in our societal pressures unit. However, know that if you are to use the authority principle to deliver an influence message, you must establish what the recipient determines to be credible and believable. For example, we established that Ahmed had no respect for local police or British military operating in his area, and so using them as a vehicle to deliver a message would have been futile. What we did establish is that he was extremely well influenced by his peers, who had looked after him in his formative years. These were the people that he had joined the Taliban with. Therefore, it was not necessarily the Taliban that he saw as the overriding authority to motivate him to do things, but it was his friends that had shown him compassion and helped him in a time of need. Therefore, that showed us the personality type and qualities we, as specialist debriefers, needed to adopt if we were to be successful in influencing Ahmed into doing something that he previously wouldn't have done, i.e. provide us information that would get bombs out of the ground. So now let's turn it to the business case study of Lucy and her interaction with Tom. If you remember, she set up a phone call with him via a handwritten letter and was aiming to introduce Tom to her company's service, build personal buying and credibility, and also try and identify elements of Tom's personality that she could utilize to assist in developing that long-term mutually beneficial relationship. In all honesty, she was fairly unsuccessful in achieving part 2 of her aim. However, she did identify elements of Tom's professional life, not necessarily personal life, that she would later use to form her influence strategy. When engaging with Tom, they identified common ground really early on in the phone conversation about his extremely busy schedule, and he commented that he was really thankful for her informing him of her intention to call him at a specific time. Lucy used the elicitation funnel to get more information and listening wheel to make him relax. And this got her to find out more information about what was keeping him busy and causing him the most pressure, providing her with loads of dropout information, which she could then fill in a DNA of influence and in an influence plan. The information such as workload, time constraints, and etc., she knew that she'd be able to offer help with this as part of her business offer if he became one of her clients. What Lucy was doing here was understanding the need of the client to a much more precise and efficient manner. Once she collected more information on him, she could enter it into the DNA of influence that we spoke about in webinar 1 and start to formulate a short-term influence plan that would articulate the value of her proposition to him in the most effective manner. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're not lying. It's just ensuring that the value is communicated in the most effective and efficient manner. For more information on the short-term influence plan, please refer to webinar 1 or visit our website or come on one of our workshops where our coaches will assist you in applying our methodology into your specific influence needs. Okay, so here's a quick list of the key learning outcomes that we've discussed briefly today, and our longer courses and services go into a lot more depth with. They've been put up on screen for you. So just remember that we are only in the understand phase, okay? And in order to achieve those 9 business outcomes, we use the information that we've gathered in the understand phase, so a bit of profiling, building rapport, building trust, listening, effectively questioning, we then start using that to assist us in the communicate and influence parts of our methodology. And only once you've completed all of those will you be able to achieve those, well, any one of those business outcomes that you want to use to improve your business. Okay, so that concludes the webinar. And to find out where else we use our methodology with Ahmed and Tom, ensure that you watch our future webinars with Artisan. I will take you through the communication model, which includes units on interpersonal communications, emotional intelligence, and assessing credibility and deception, which I'm sure you'll find rather interesting. Look forward to hearing from anybody that's watched these webinars. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you on some of our seminars and workshops in the very close future. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.